Right, guys, we'll just give it 30 seconds before we start and see people are still joining. Right. Just checking I wasn't on mute. Hi, guys, and welcome to another AST Virtual event. I think this is our 5th one. So we're getting a really good turnout. We're really enjoying them. We hope you're finding them useful as well. Just a few kind of how it kind of works and things like that. So you'll be able to see that, you know, if you do want to sort of tweak things out, then obviously please feel free. Our guests, Colin and Gary Lewin, will be telling you a little bit about kind of their opinions and things like that. But obviously, if they do say, please keep it in-house, then obviously respect those rules. When they're talking, they may not go into obviously individual players in terms of history. I know there's certain players that, you know, had long injuries at the club, but obviously for kind of confidentiality and stuff like that, we can't actually go into them. But generally, they'll be here to kind of tell stories and stuff like that. If you've got any questions, feel free to raise your hand virtually. Obviously don't do it in person because I won't be able to see you. But you will have a raise your hand feature on your phone, iPad, tablet, or laptop, and I will bring you in as and when I can. You can also, if you don't want to kind of come on air, so to speak, you can put your question on the Q&A function, and we'll either answer it on air or one of the board members will answer it kind of behind the scenes, so to speak. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and I'm gonna ask Nigel to quickly join me. So AST members would have got a update and we've had a few people ask us about the Spurs loan. So I'm just gonna get Nigel to briefly mention that. Nigel?
Evening, Echo. Receiving loud and clear?
Yeah, go for it.
Excellent. So we put around a few words with the newsletter because it was announced last week that Spurs were one of the 53 companies in the UK who had accessed a soft loan, a cheap loan from the UK government, which was COVID related. So all perfectly above board, but it was £175 million. And it's the companies who've accessed it tend to be companies like automotive companies, chemical companies, people who are employing lots of people and are deemed to be strategic to the UK economy. We can argue whether Tottenham fall into that bracket or not. They're the only leisure company, non-aviation, who have accessed it. Why have they accessed it? One, £175 million. It's available, it's cheap, and at the time when no football club's getting any income coming in, it's the time to access all sources of liquidity. The Arsenal situation is that we're absolutely convinced that they're using their overdraft with Barclays, which is exactly why you would have it in place. We also set out some of the debt positions related to the stadium finance. So whilst we've been in the new ground for 14 years and people fixated on the 270 million we borrowed at the time for it, Tottenham's refinancing at the end of September last year put all their stadium finance on a long-term basis, and that is 637 million. 637 million of stadium related debt that they need to sort out over the next 10, 15, 20 years. We've had 14 years of paying ours off and we've still got another 12 years to go. This is something, you know, it's a big situation for them. So raising the money last week, very smart on their behalf. Could Arsenal do it? We possibly think not, because of the implied credit rating of the entity. When Tottenham issued their long-term debt in September, it had to get a certain credit rating from various agencies, which allowed pension funds and insurance companies to invest in it, and that gave them the certain rating to get into the UK government scheme. So they've done very well. It's going to save them 70 grand a week in interest, and you can work out what players are on 70 grand a week. So, smart financial engineering from them, and we're going to hear more about it in the weeks to come. So if there's any questions, put them on the chat, the Q&A, and we'll do them as we go along. But over to you, Akhil.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Nigel. I'm going to welcome Chloe, who's also a board member. Some of you may know her, some of you may not, but here's a chance to see what she looks like. The AST obviously sent out a survey to our members, and that survey, it was fed back to obviously Arsenal, and we had some good dialogue with them this week. It was also fed back to the Premier League, and that's the stuff that you would have filled out about sort of artificial sound, what to do about the seats, should we cover them, should we not, and things like that. So Chloe's just going to briefly talk to you a little bit about that and kind of the results and what we fed back. So Chloe, over to you, and your slides should be on show.
That's great, thank you. So we had over 300 responses to the survey, which was brilliant. And of those, a third provided written comments. And this really allowed us to provide a comprehensive response to Arsenal. And there was a meeting last week that Arsenal attended with the Premier League. And some of the feedback that we've had from that meeting is that we've actually provided significant insights. So thank you to everybody that completed the survey. Our understanding is that some of our other supporters trusts with other Premier League clubs did not provide such comprehensive responses and actually didn't sort of offer ideas and solutions as we had, and perhaps weren't as positive. So that was really, really good to get that feedback from that meeting. And also, hopefully, that provides you with reassurance that when you do take the time to fill out this information, it's actually, going to the source and going to be used to help to shape things. Now, obviously, the key question was around whether we should return behind closed doors. And as you can see from the stats there, whilst quite a number of you felt that we shouldn't, the season should be abandoned, and certainly for those of you that did make comments, there was some quite strong individual comments, I think it's fair to say, about not continuing. And while some people were unsure, you can see that 60% feel that we must complete the season. And we're looking forward to football's return, as I'm sure most of us on this call are, when we kick off next week. We also then looked at the match day experience. And what we asked you to do here was to actually comment on a scale as to what would be important for you to enhance the match day experience. Now, obviously, behind closed doors is a very strange concept. As Arsenal fans, we've kind of had experience of this back in the early 90s when they were rebuilding the North Bank at Highbury, and we had the mural for a season. And whilst quite a few of you remembered that time and, felt that it was all a bit strange and it did impact on atmosphere, it's fair to say there was an acknowledgement among the comments that obviously we are in unprecedented times. And if we want the season to continue, we're going to have to make some adjustments. So you can see there how overall the different suggestions and options that we've got were rated. Certainly the highest importance was around having banners and signs to cover the empty seats at the Emirates. I think it's fair to say that over the last few months, the nation has embraced technology, and certainly from an AST perspective, we've been having these regular meetings, and there's a real appetite to actually use the technology and so that we can have more interaction, online hangouts, Zoom into the ground. That all sounds really impressive to me. I'm not sure how it will work, but all of that feedback has gone in, and hopefully we will be able to utilise some of this technology in the coming weeks. Not a surprise to me, if I'm honest. Less importance was placed around having cardboard cutout of fans in the seats or computer generated images. And then in terms of the actual sound within the stadium, 68% of people would prefer the actual sound to be broadcast. But the flip side to that is 32% would actually like simulated crowd noise. And from the comments we could see, there was mixed views. You know, we've had some experience now with the Bundesliga games. It definitely does impact atmosphere. So it'll be interesting to see what decisions are made around that in the coming weeks.
We have, Chloe, been told earlier by the Premier League, but also by Arsenal last week, that I think the broadcasters will offer a choice. So every individual fan watching on TV will be able to choose if they want actual sound or if they want sort of artificial sound like the Bundesliga. So,
oh, even better.
Yeah.
So you'll have the choice. Now, one of the things that was definitely a hot topic was regarding where games were going to be played. Now, obviously, there is still the situation to be resolved around the Everton-Liverpool game, but all games are going to be going ahead utilising the home grounds, which is something that, you know, everybody felt very strongly about, which is not unexpected. We also took the opportunity to actually have a look at the impact of COVID. It was really good to see that 70% of people that responded are happy with the engagement from Arsenal. There's obviously been regular updates on the website. There's been emails coming out. We also know of individuals who've been contacted personally by the club, and a lot of the activity that's been happening, you know, through Arsenal in the community. Some of you will have had personal experience of that. In terms of the way that Arsenal dealt with ticketing, broadly positive response. People are satisfied with the approach that's being taken, the options that you've got in terms of refunds or having a credit. So that's really positive to see. And obviously, COVID's creating a financial crisis throughout football. And 97% of people feel that it's important that Arsenal and the Premier League use their financial resources to help the lower leagues if it's required. And in terms of some of the comments that we had, there was some suggestion as, you know, is this an opportunity for us to actually review the whole business model? And it would be very interesting to see whether there's anything that comes out about that over the coming weeks. I'll leave you to ponder that. Something that we were particularly interested in is about fans staying away from ground when the games restart. Obviously, in terms of the public health information, social distancing, etc., it is not advisable to go to the stadiums where the games are being held. 97% of you said that you will stay away from grounds. It's probably worth me pointing out there was actually only 1% of people who answered no to that. And that's very encouraging for us to hear, because that's certainly something that within the AST we feel very strongly about, and is something that we will engage with Arsenal around, you know, supporting that and making sure that that doesn't become an issue. So thank you to everybody that completed the survey. It's really good to know that all of our responses, you know, are being discussed from an Arsenal perspective and at Premier League meetings. So it really does give us the opportunity to shape the way that things are going to be over the next few weeks. And it's a good opportunity for us to have, you know, made our voices heard, and we will wait to see, you know, where that ultimately leads us.
Thank you, Chloe. And yeah, as you said, I think 2% said not sure, and as you say, 1% said they might. So I think they probably just pressed the wrong button. I'm sure.
Well, that's what I liked to think, or they were just being extremely honest.
Yeah, maybe. Thanks for your time, Chloe.
Thanks, Akil.
Just a couple of messages. Clive Hill, I know you put a question on Nigel accidentally pressed the wrong button, so can you please repost it? And Andrew, I know you were having problems hearing, but I hope you've sorted that. I don't think it's on our end, because everyone else seems to be okay at the moment. So on that note, I want to welcome our main guests for the evening, and that's Gary and Colin Lewin, and also my colleague Tim Payton, who's going to help me co-host. I can't keep him away from screen. We had a few technical issues with Collins. I'm pleased to see him, because it was touch and go, and there was a lot of banter between the Lewins there as well about who's better on technology and who broke their laptop first and all that sort of stuff. But guys, how are you? Gary, how are you?
Yeah, good evening. How you doing, everybody?
Colin?
Yeah, good. All good. Thanks for having us on.
Good. Thank you very much. So there's quite a few topics we're going to kind of discuss in the next kind of hour or so. We'll have members coming in and stuff like that. But I guess firstly, you know, we're in these really weird, challenging times. I mean, how's life personally been for you guys with families and things like that? And then obviously, how is it kind of impacted from a work perspective? And, you know, tell us a little bit about the work perspective in the clinic and things like that. happy for either of you. So
Yeah, obviously from our point of view, we've got to put this myth to bed. Colin is my cousin, not my brother or my son.
son.
So we set up the Lewin Clinic last year, which we set up together, and was going very well until the lockdown happened, and then obviously we had to close and lock down. From my point of view, I've got 3 daughters. My youngest one's still at home. My middle one moved home for lockdown, and nicely enough, she had a baby in February, so I've become a granddad again. So we've had a pleasant family lockdown together, although difficult. So,
yeah.
And then we're just in the process now of getting the clinic up and running again. So from my point of view, it's been good. I think Colin's had to work with me, so it's been a hell of a time for him. So I'll let him fill you in on that.
Yeah, similar really. My background's not quite as glamorous as Gary's. I'm in my son's bedroom. It's the only place I can get a bit of peace and quiet. Yeah, my kids are 16 and I've got twins of 14. So it's been a bit odd for them being off school, and obviously to have to close the clinic 5 months in wasn't ideal. But yeah, it's been okay. It's been good to get it back up and running though the last couple of weeks, just to start working with it and see how we're going to do this for the next few months. But it looks possible. It looks okay.
Cool. Before I bring Tim in, so obviously, you know, we'll talk about the kind of Arsenal side a little bit later, but obviously, Gary, you joined in '86 and Colin, you left in 2018. So you were at Arsenal for a long time, but obviously you've launched your own clinic, and stuff. What was the decision behind that? And just tell us a little bit more about the clinic.
Well, unfortunately, I keep calling myself a dinosaur compared to Colin. I first went to Arsenal in '78. I signed as a schoolboy and become a player in '80, and then got released in '82 before I went back in '86. So my connection with the club goes back a long, long way. And I left in 2008 to go full-time with England, and then Colin took over my role. Colin joined the club in '95. Mm-hmm. And obviously I've still had a close association with the club in all the years I worked with England. And then I left England in 2016. I did private practice for a year in other clinics. Colin was still working at Arsenal. I went to West Ham for a year, which was an experience. And then went back into private practice again. And at that time, Colin left Arsenal, and we got together and we said we'd give it a few months in case anything in football came up. And when it didn't, we got our heads together and thought, well, let's go for it. And it took a year to the day from the first meeting we had over a cup of coffee, and Colin had a cup of tea. And we went through all the planning process, had some great input from Arsene Wenger, David Dean, Richard Law. So we got some great support to finally set the clinic up. And I'll let Colin explain from his point of view what he was like.
Yeah, not much to add really. It literally was a year from having that conversation around, let's see what comes up. Anything interesting comes up for either of us, then obviously you'll go and do it. And it got to around October time, and we thrashed out a few ideas, as Gary said, with huge input from David Dean, Arsene, and Dick Law was magnificent. Did a really, really great job for us on the business plan and everything else, which wasn't our skill set, shall we say. And from there, fairly quickly, Petr Cech got involved and decided he was going to invest with us, which was good to get the first one over the line. And then in the summer, I was discussing with Aaron Ramsey, and me and Gary met Aaron's agent and everything else, and we know the family quite well over the years. Then Aaron came on board, and then more recently, Mesut Ozil, and that completes our list of investors, really. And it's been really helpful to have people like that, not just the money, but to have people like that from the football background and the Arsenal background. And I think it's helped us along the way, knowing we've got their backing. And obviously we want to do as well as we can for them as investors. But it literally was, well, I think we got in there and saw our first patients end of October, and it literally was a year.
Oh. Cool. We'll come on to a bit more about that a bit later, and also the Arsenal connection. But Tim's got a few questions that he's kind of got ready. Tim.
Thanks, Akil. I very much wanted to kind of discuss the medical side of things. And I guess it's quite similar. If you're thinking about reopening for patients, you have to think about PPE and how you interact around them and what's safe to do, which is very similar for what's going on in football clubs at the moment in terms of the protocol they've had to come back to play. Could you perhaps talk us through what PPE will be needed when you treat a sports person, and what sort of things you think will be going on in clubs at the moment to ensure that it's safe for all the athletes?
How long we got? An hour. Look, I've been quite involved in this because I am a consultant to the Arsenal women's team. So we're going through this process for the Arsenal women at the moment. And I've got to say that the job Gary Driscoll's done at the club is phenomenal, because the planning that goes into this return to play is incredible. So I'll try and really briefly summarise it, and I'll let Colin then explain how that comes on to what we've done in the clinic. So first port of call, you've got to make sure the players are safe before they come into the training ground, because you can't contaminate the training ground. So all the players will do a wellness questionnaire every morning. If they don't complete it, they're not allowed in the training ground. They will take their temperatures at home. They will report any members of their family that show any symptoms. So this is all before they get to the training ground. If they get 3 ticks, they drive to the training ground, where they're met by a member of the medical team who's in full PPE equipment. They get asked the same questions. They get their temperature taken again. If they pass that test, they're allowed then to drive into the training ground, into their allotted car park space. They're already in all their kit. They've got all their personal equipment with them, their own bottles, their own GPS units, anything they use for activation before training, they carry everything with them. They then go on the pitches and do their training. Now, in the Premier League, it's been based over 3 phases. Phase 1 was the early days, and that's where they were allowed to run in groups or joining in groups of 4 or 5 with no contact whatsoever. So the first group would train at 10 o'clock in the morning. Often the last group would be 6 o'clock at night, because they weren't allowed on the site at the same time. That then went on to phase 2, when it went up to 10 players. So they then had small-sided football sessions, but with no contact. And they're now in close contact training. So it's the phase 3 part of it. And as all the fans would have seen at the weekend, they played their first game. So there's a hell of a lot of work that goes into the preparation and just allowing them to come in and train. We've had to adopt a similar sort of thing for the clinic, and I'll let Colin go into the details of how it's very similar in what we're doing.
Yeah, it's similar. I think we're lucky in the clinic that we've got a fair bit of space. We've got 1,000 square foot rehab gym, which means a lot of our rehab that happens in there can be done at distance, which is really helpful. In the treatment room side of things, we've got a protocol that we sat and had to thrash out. Guidance from Public Health England and everything else, same as everybody. And yeah, we have the PPE, temperature checks for patients on arrival if they really need to be there. Ideally, we'll vet them first and see if anything we can do without them having to come for a face-to-face. But obviously the post-surgery and a few others are coming in. We're limiting the hands-on treatment as much as we can, but we are literally gloves, mask, apron, and a stringent set of checks before they even see us. Any family and friends that come with them stay in the car. Our reception area can accommodate 2 people, but that's about it. And yeah, it's been different, but we had a practice run for the first few days and it worked really well, and everyone seems very sensible about it. And as you can imagine, there's sanitizer everywhere, and in between each patient, we're having to leave 15 minutes to thoroughly clean the place and disinfect everything that anyone may have touched. But we're already getting used to it. It's only been a few days of it, but we're getting used to it already. But it's different.
This regular testing that all the players and staff and everybody in effect that comes into that closed down training environment, does that give the players and the medical staff that are involved a real degree of confidence in the system and the process? Do you get the feeling that your colleagues are happy with their work environment and happy that the right things are happening?
Yeah, what you've got to remember is the tests they're doing are here and now tests. So basically, when they have the test, have they got it or haven't they got it? they could leave the training ground and get it. So by the time they actually had the results of the test, they could be positive. But it's the whole picture that they've created. So part the testing, the questionnaires, the support for the players, the support for the players' families and close relatives. That's everything they've put together to try and relieve the anxiety players have got. And I mean, it's public knowledge that players at some clubs are still very apprehensive. I mean, I know Troy Deeney's been well documented, and I see that Kante's actually joined in training today at Chelsea. So they've obviously got over those fears. But I think in general, it's been welcomed. The anxieties have been overcome, and everything that's been put in place has reassured players and staff. Don't forget the staff. They're the ones also that have to be reassured. And you haven't read much about the officials. They're going through this same process at the moment, because without them, the games aren't going to go ahead. And they will be going through the same sort of process.
Yeah, even the guys that sit in the VAR room have to be tested.
Yeah, well, they will have a match day protocol for anybody that is involved around the stadium. Will go through some sort of protocol. That is a massive amount of work, and there's going to be small hiccups, but I must admit that they have to be applauded for what they've done, how they've done it, and to get us where we've got. And hopefully the next week there'll be no more hiccups and we can get on with watching football again.
There probably isn't a safer place to be, is there, really? I mean, as we know, Gary, it's the best place you're going to be, really. The training ground and the stadiums are going to be full of people that have tested very recently that don't have it. And look at the experience, as Gary said, Gary O'Driscoll, Jez Steinberg's, Flo Newton at Arsenal. They've done an unbelievable job along with the other doctors to get it to where it is now, really.
Yeah, Akhil and myself were on a call with the Premier League earlier on for all the supporters groups as a general update. And they said that their objective had been to make the Premier League work environment as safe as anywhere you could be in the country, to have the highest standards and really reassure. And it does sound, from what you're saying, that they've done a good job of doing that. And I thought your point about the staff was interesting, because you'll know much more from the peer reviews and being in your networks, but it doesn't appear that healthy young athletes have really, anywhere in the world, have had particular problems from COVID. Their concern is more going to be passing it on to family members and acting as carriers to those groups that are more vulnerable. Is that correct? Have you seen any evidence that it can affect the professional athlete rather than other people in society?
The problem with that is this, as you mentioned, is unprecedented. Now, there has been some concerns raised about players or athletes that have been tested positive. We don't know what effects it has on the respiratory or cardiac centres. And some clubs have done a screening programme to check respiratory systems and cardiac systems on players that are returning to train. So, but in general, young fit athletes are a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of people that are at risk. As you say, it's more people around them and possibly carrying it. So I think that's where a lot of the work's been done to relieve the anxieties of players and staff.
If we move on now to the players themselves and their fitness, what are the challenges? What medically will you want a player who stopped for a few weeks, in effect had the pre-season break, now getting ready in a hurry in this run of games? What will the physio work be to try and make sure they're as strong and as ready as possible for June the 17th?
I would think communication, first of all. You've got the fitness coaches there, medical teams, physios, as you say. I think they've had a fair bit of time off. They'll have been keeping fit, whatever that means. They'll be keeping fit, but you're not going to be able to reproduce training. Certainly not going to be able to reproduce matches. And that's going to be a very specific fitness that they've been trying to chase. Now they're all back training, albeit in small groups. I think it's going to be more realistic and getting back to normal for what they need to do. But as you rightly say, the ramp up is going to be the challenge. In an ideal world, they probably would have another week or two, in an ideal world. But they're going to get it started. And the most important thing about all of this is a level playing field. So everyone's had the same set of circumstances. So you can't have too much of a complaint. But with regards to the level of the players on match day 1, probably they'll be a little bit behind on what you'd expect for pre-season on a normal summer for game 1 there. But it's doing the best you can to help the manager and the coaches get what they want the players to do, and checking out the ones who've got the minor issues, Tim.
And there's a
I
real
think the biggest
cliche.
change. Sorry, Tim, I think the biggest change they did, and it was a concern of all of us, was that they were going to go back into the first game without any match practice, and they changed that this week and allowed teams to do behind closed doors matches, and I think that was a massive step forward to help that getting back to normal levels. But I totally agree with Colin. They're not going to get to the levels you would normally expect from a Premiership team. But every team is at the same point. It's a level playing field. So I think the two will level each other up. There's been a lot of reports about increase of injuries from Germany. I don't think those reports are completely accurate. And it will be interesting from a medical point of view if there is an increase in the incidence of injury. Time will tell, but that's part and parcel of the sport. That could happen at any time.
What do you think about the fact that they're playing over the summer months? I guess they're very good at watering pitches now, but I don't know if the pitches are harder. But also, they could be playing in the 80s, in the 90s, some real hot summer days. You look at when those kickoff times are scheduled. How do you get players ready for that?
No different to July or August when they do pre-season and start the season. So I don't think that's a big issue. I think they're used to that.
Yeah, I agree. Although the only slight difference is the Premier League generally starts Saturday, or at least weekend. I suppose you have got these midweek games thrown in, but we've played in many Champions League qualifiers over the years that get dropped into week 1 and week 2. So, yeah, you're right. It's going to be a slight difference, but I'm not sure it's much different to a normal Premier League start, really.
And you mentioned it in your answer, Gary, that kind of one of the cliches of football is match fit. And we're all sitting there, he doesn't look match fit. But what does match fit actually mean? Is it something you can only get from playing actual matches? And even then, do you really need to play Premier League matches at their intensity? Or can you replicate it in a training situation so that someone is match fit without actually having played a match? I hope I've made that question sound sense. I think you know what I meant.
Yeah, I mean, it's no different from when players would return from a long-term injury. And it takes them time to get up to the levels they were at before. We use the layman's terms of not being match fit. From a medical point of view, we would talk about neuromuscular activation, the pathways between the brain and the body, the reaction times, the conditioning of falling over, getting up, contact between players, making runs and then recovering, then making another run. The variables when you come into contact with players, as in having contact with another player, what forces go through your body. You can replicate that in training, but the intensity of a match takes it to a slightly higher level, and it's very difficult to replicate competition. Very, very difficult. And you only get that by competing.
One of the new rules that's been brought in is this 5 substitute rule. And we understand probably why that's been brought in. Do you think is that likely, from your knowledge of football, will that benefit clubs with the bigger, stronger squads? Or could it help the clubs with smaller squads, but it means that they don't literally have players on the pitch that can't stand up anymore? How do you see the 5 substitutes perhaps changing the tactics, and who does it benefit? Because it's one of the changes where you can't say the league will have had its integrity throughout. It's quite a significant rule change, with a quarter of the season to go.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think you'd be leaning towards the idea that the club with the stronger bench would probably benefit from it. I can see why you'd say that. But on the other side of it, the so-called weaker clubs get the chance to replace those players that aren't fit on 5 different occasions with 5 different players, in theory. I think it's going to level itself out, I think. But I do get your point that the stronger benches do have the ability to change that game, in theory, don't they?
And don't forget, most teams are going to be starting with a full squad.
Yeah.
So they're going to have a full selection. In fact, you're going to see some players that don't make the 20 on the bench because the squads are bigger than 20. And I would like to think there's nobody going to be injured at the start of this season. So it'll be interesting. I made the point in that I think tactically it'll be really interesting, which is not our forte. The coaches, we have a field day with it on how tactical decisions change games with more substitutes. It'd be interesting.
I'm just going to bring in a couple of questions, Tim, just to hold fire there. There's one from Nicole that's really good. My other screen is here. It's fun looking away. But with obviously kind of pre-season happening at the moment, but it being very different, do you think there's kind of doctors and physios across the land using different sort of techniques to keep players fit or get them fitter, or they'll have some players who are more fitter than others? Do you think anyone's doing anything differently, or do you think actually it is similar to a pre-season?
I don't think there's anything brand new going on. I'm not sure there's any skullduggery anywhere or brand new techniques, no.
Yeah.
The vital thing is going to be the fitness coaches, the S&C team and the physios and docs working together so that they're pushing everyone at just the right curve. If they don't push them hard enough, they're not going to be ready. If they push them too hard, you're going to get more injured than you'd like. So it's managing to keep that ramp so they peak in theory at the right time. That's going to be the real test, because it'll be a slightly odd setup. So yeah, to get them as good as they can be at the right time is going to be a fine balance, I would say.
Yeah, I'd reinforce that. And don't forget, normally in the pre-season, these guys would do most of their work in the first 2 or 3 weeks of pre-season, and then the games start. And then the football takes over, the coaches take over, and the support staff, medical and sports science, almost take a slight step backwards, although they're still monitoring and looking after players. The football takes over. They've had a 6-week period where these guys have been at the front of all the planning because they're the crucial ones, because players can't go into contact. It's the physical side of it that they're going to be working on. So I think that will be the slight difference. And I think they've probably had more say in this planning they would in a normal pre-season. I would like to think with that, the communication of the multidisciplinary teams would be far greater, because that's going to be the key to it.
And that's the sort of follow-up from Nicole as well. And she said that what sort of impact and would it have on players that were maybe coming back from injury just before COVID? So you're thinking about a Hector Bellerin, maybe Rob Holding, who's then had their season cut, bit of work at home, and how would it affect those kind of players coming back from injury? Will they be? Has it done them a favour by having this off time, or has it actually not done them a favour at all?
I think they'll be delighted. I think they've gained 9 games of a season that they probably wouldn't have got. I can't speak for them individually, but
of course, yeah.
I think they've seen another 9 games that they can make a difference with. They're going to be on a better curve than the others in that, in theory, they're going to be fitter, having not had the match attrition beforehand. Yeah, I'd be surprised if any of them were thinking they've done badly out of it. I would think they're all seeing it as a bonus.
I would say the only thing on that would be the anxiety of not playing for such a long time. I think that will be slightly increased, because normally when you come back from a long-term injury, the way they both have, then you ease yourself back into the team and then you get into the flow of it. That's now being disturbed. And I think that will put doubts in their mind, which I think will soon be overcome once they start playing games again. But I agree with Colin. I think the extended rest has probably done them good.
There's an interesting question from Alex McKenzie, and he's talked about kind of, as players have come back after the lockdown and stuff, they'll obviously all be potentially at different fitness levels, because some would have worked harder at home, some might not have. And I guess it will be the same after a summer off as well. But I mean, how do clubs deal with that? Because you have players at absolute different levels. How do you get them all to that right level? And can you do that in this short space of time?
Sorry, Cole, that goes back to what we just said about the multidisciplinary team doing their homework and doing their work. This is where their work at the moment is crucial. Sorry, Cole, you crack on.
In theory, some might have done too much. I've seen a couple of players in the clinic from different leagues and from different parts of the country and Europe who have decided they're going to go for more runs to keep themselves fit. And so instead of being football, they're suddenly going for more and more longer runs. And they've had minor injuries related to runners, almost like running injuries. So while you got some that haven't arguably done enough. You'd have some that have been doing too much. But you're right, it's getting the back in, assessing them where they are, and being as individual as you can with their training. But, you know, Arsenal will be doing that.
Yeah. I'm just going to bring on Joe, who's got a question. So, Joe, you should be able to unmute yourself and ask your question. Welcome. You might be on mute. Joe? Joanne? We'll come back to Joe. Tim, over to you again.
One of the reports from Germany was that, and I'm sure this never happens at Arsenal, but there was less feigning of injury by players, and they felt that this was the environment that no supporters had created, and also a sort of get on with the game type approach. I would have thought that the odd tactical injury break for a rest might be quite important, but perhaps the stuff that comes out of fans, noise, and the emotion is going to be any less. Have you watched much of what's happened so far? Have you got a feel on how it's actually going to change the interaction of those that go on the pitch during the game from a medical point of view?
I've seen a couple of games, and you're right. It has been very, honest? Very honest. I mean, people being very respectful for the referees, and I saw one player go to help another player up when he'd fouled him, and then went to help him up and realised he couldn't, and then it was all a bit odd. But yeah, I think you're right. I think there has to be a little bit less emotion, you would have thought, in the games, and I think that will come out in what you're saying there with the tactical injuries, perhaps. But I think everyone seems a lot more honest. I've only seen a few games, in fairness, but.
Because they've said the same about challenging to referees as well.
Yeah,
I mean, I've seen a few games as well, and I agree with Colin. I think it's been quite placid at times. They actually remind me of pre-season friendlies, where I think there's less contact, there's less passion. I'm not convinced the Premier League will be like that. I think the mentality of the Premier League players will be completely different, and so it'll be interesting to compare the two, I must admit.
And is your understanding of the rules football is going to use that if a player fails a test, they will be withdrawn because they have to do the self-isolation period, but they will just be in effect treated as an injured player, not available to the squad? So if you fail a test, it's like pulling your hamstring; it's just not available.
Yeah, I mean, the rule is it's the rule of the land. It isn't just football. And again, this is all the stuff that's gone into planning the training. With all the GPS data, and I mean, there's a company called Stat Sports that have done most of the work because they've got most of the Premiership teams, and they've done a couple of articles on it that are fascinating. But the law of the land is if you're tested positive, you have to go into isolation for 7 days. Anyone that you're coming into contact with for more than 15 minutes under the track and trace system, they have to go into isolation, self-isolation for 14 days. So all the work that's being done with football, with all the training and all the matches, they've got all the evidence that players are not in contact for more than 15 minutes. So if a player gets tested positive, he will go home and isolate. It'll be treated as an injury. And then, in theory, they're allowed to come back 7 days later. But as I mentioned earlier on tonight, they would have to meet certain criteria. So they might have tests on their respiratory system. They might repeat cardiac screens, because we don't know if any damage is being done to those, even in a young and fit, healthy athlete.
Scott, I think Joe's back. I think there was the Juventus player, was he, Dybala, who had it, I think, 2 months ago, but he came out today and said he's still not quite feeling 100%, and he's a sort of 28, 29-year-old fit footballer. So,
yeah, again, and everyone's reaction to a virus is different. I mean, we all call it man flu, but everyone reacts differently to getting the viruses. So every player may be different. And this is the side of it we don't know. This is because it's unprecedented. So, and again, coming back to the backroom staff, they'll be looking at the players, they'll be looking at their GPS data, they'll be doing blood tests on them. They know if a player's not quite right.
Yeah. Joe, I think we've got you on now.
Yes, sorry about that.
That's okay, no worries.
Yeah, just a quick question really about youth football, and I wondered what you both thought about from a kind of medical and physiological perspective. Do you think that young players are overtrained from a too younger age?
In general?
Yeah.
How long have we got left?
I mean, I suppose that the reason I ask that is there seems to be a theme and a trend, particularly I think from I'll use Jack Wilshere as the example really, from that era of particularly young English players sustaining injuries that have kind of threatened their career over and over again, and it seems to be more prominent in English players than it does others.
No, can I butt in on that one? The reason why I'm butting in early on that is I don't think it is the case. You all remember Jonathan Woodgate, played for England when he was 18, suffered quite badly with injuries throughout his career. There are a lot of young English players when I first started. Stuart Robson, the older Arsenal fans will remember, was a becoming English player that was going to be a world-class player. It's happened throughout history. What I would say is, unfortunately now, I say unfortunately, football now, we're working in the Goldfish Bowl and living in the Goldfish Bowl. So you're hearing about every single problem, injury, players missing games. I think this has always been a problem. I think with the academy set up now, they've put a lot more things in place. With my experience, and I'll let Colin go into this a bit more because he worked with Des Ryan at the academy at Arsenal, they've put a really, really good athletic development program in place, as a lot of clubs have done, to make sure the development of the players is protected, and when they do get into the first team, they're ready for the load of the first team.
Yeah, I think when does someone get into the first team historically? When they're good enough or when they're strong enough? It's always going to be largely when they're good enough, isn't it? And as Gary said there, Des Ryan over the past 7-8 years has completely revamped what Arsenal are doing from under 9s, 10s, 11s right the way through. I genuinely think we're starting to see the fruits of that now. And Des always said to me, give me 7-8 years, then you'll see. And I think you are seeing that now, that boys are coming through, not only good enough, because obviously the coaches are doing their job, recruitment are doing their job very well, but they're strong enough and robust enough. And it's an easy thing to say, but they're moving better and they're stronger and they're coping with the first team training and matches better. Yeah, but I think you're right. The idea that these young English boys were all getting injured and ruining careers is probably not quite right, but you're only ever going to look at the English ones. You probably wouldn't pay attention to a load of young Spaniards getting injured. You probably wouldn't notice it, in fairness.
My final question before I went back to Akhil to pick up, Joe has kind of led me into this, was going to be, once they are professionals, are they playing too much? And I'm sure you could both talk for an hour on that. But looking at what's about to happen, so we're going to get this run of games, squeezed in, then we'll turn around very quickly and start another season. Then we'll go straight into a Euros. Does football need to take this this unprecedented event, as we've described it, Gary, and have a think about its structures and use the opportunity to change? Or do you think everything's fine and that the players just have to get on with it and they'll cope?
No, I've been documented in saying I'm hoping that this really sad state of events that's occurred now will actually cause change for good in the sport. I would like us to see the international calendars being lined up. I'd like us to have a proper mid-season break, not an attempt at it that they had this year. I would like to see more structure to the season. And you touched on it there. We've got to decide what we want from our athletes. Do we want them to train to be able to perform to their highest level and entertain people? Or do we want them to play non-stop every week and they can't train? And so then arguably, how do they ever improve if they're not going to put the groundwork in the training? It was one of the biggest things that when Arsene first come to Arsenal, it was one of the biggest cultural changes he made, in that he made the players realise you're training to be able to play. So you train the way you play. Whereas historically, football was, as long as you played on the Saturday, it didn't matter what you did during the week. And I think, I'm hoping that will come from this, that there will be more acceptance that players need time to train and recover, and a level playing field. So some teams will play 3 games in 6 days in a season. Some teams play 3 games over 10 days. It's not a level playing field. And I would like to think it will change.
What's the ideal number of games? I know there's not a one size fits all, but as an average, what for a top professional, what's about the right number of games over a full year? Because they're probably getting up to 60 or 70 if they're a top player that plays every game for club and country. Where would you like to see that come in to optimise their
first and then I'll answer after?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. As many as it takes to win trophies will be the argument. As many as it takes. So I don't think you'd ever see a player saying, I'd love it to have a 40-game season where I went out of both cups in the first round and played 38 league games. You're talking physically, I suppose. But
yeah, because you could build the season so that it was only 40 games. So what I'm saying is, if you built the season around, physiology and the athletes, how many games would you have them playing in a season?
The answer is I don't know, because then you wouldn't need a squad, would you? In theory, you could play that same very small group of players in those 38, 40 games and get away with it. So I think lots of games are good because it means you're successful. It also means you can rotate your squad. But over the years, I'm sorry to harp on about this a little bit, but you had league tables and injury tables comparing teams playing 58 games against a team playing 40 games. Guess what? The team playing 58 got a few more injuries, but still they were being compared in injury tables, and it used to drive us all mad. But in answer to your question, I think I'll come back to it again. As many as it takes to be successful, the bigger squads are always going to play more games.
The point I made, I agree with Colin. But you've got 2 arguments here. You've got domestic and international football. And again, we're talking about a level playing field from a team perspective. Well, international duty, you'll get some teams that might lose 3 or 4 players. You'll get other teams where, I remember times at Arsenal, we had nobody training at all because everybody was on international duty unless they were injured.
You were gone as well. What do you mean? You were gone as well.
Yeah. That's why I got out, because we had no players there. I could go away. It was easy. We've got the same thing at the moment with the Arsenal women. The whole squad are international players. So international week, the only players that stay behind are injured players. So that's the bit I want. I would like to see a bit more working between UEFA Champions League, international football, and club domestic football. And I think, but even, look, I'm going to get me soapbox now. Even in this country, I don't think we do things well. Years and years and years as the England physio, one of the biggest problems we had at the end of the season was the English League season usually finished the first week in May. Cup final was the second week in May. Our internationals were the first weekend in June. 75% of our squad didn't play football for 3 weeks. We would then have to go and play 2 qualifiers. All the other leagues in Europe finished their league the week before the qualifiers. So they just went straight into it. But they had less midweek games. So they could play, recover. We sort of condense our season and play a lot of games with a lot of cup competitions. So I think I'm hoping when we come out of this, they'll look at that and actually come up with some more answers.
3 questions I'm going to rattle through from that have been asked. One from Mukta. Can you tell us how technology has impacted your role over the last 3 decades? And I guess just to go a step forward, technology is great, but has it always helped, or has it sometimes become a bit too data focused? What has it been like in the last however many years?
I think to answer that, and we'll do this when we get off air, myself and Colin done a really interesting piece comparing a study of injuries that I did in 1987, that got issued in 1989, to, I think it was 2015, Cole?
No, we did 30 years apart. We did Arsenal Arsenal 1987 to Arsenal 2017 and compared the club across the board.
And if that goes into all the technologies, how it's all changed. And what we do is we'll ping it through to you after this, and you can share it with all your
members,
everyone online. And it's a fascinating read because it really covers all everything.
I think the upshot of that.
I won't go into that. Yeah.
So you're freezing a bit there, Gary. You got me?
Yeah, with it. Yeah.
I think the upshot of that question really is data doesn't particularly change what you do. The people analysing the data will change what you do. I think all the data in the world, all the technology in the world can give you good stuff, but the people looking at it and making decisions and communicating with players and communicating with staff and coaches, they're the people that change it. But yeah, GPS tracking of players was, I don't want to say a game changer, but it helped us an enormous amount with regards to measuring players' training, rehab and match data.
We've had a few questions. I can see from Neil, from Guy. I think there might be a couple more about ACLs. Obviously, that's a big factor in football. We've had a few players recently at Arsenal, Hetzer and obviously Rob Holding as well. I mean, you know, how tough are they to recover from, firstly? And is there anything you can potentially do to not prevent them maybe, but reduce them? Or is it just one of those things?
Well, when I first started, they were career-threatening. Players often didn't recover from them. Nowadays, it's routine surgery. Prevention of them, again, that comes down to training, strength, conditioning, controlling fatigue levels. But at the end of the day, it's a contact sport, and contact is a variable that we can't control. Obviously, Colin would have worked with the guys that you mentioned there. We recently, in the women's team, had Daniel Carter and Jordan Nobbs that had cruciate. So it's a common injury now, and but the recovery from it is improved immensely over the years.
Yeah, I think it's there is some evidence that you can reduce the incidence, but it's not great evidence, and it's you can't reduce it much, but it does come down to the fatigue.
Got a question from Guy as well about kind of sort of the mental health side as well. Obviously, it's quite a big thing in the country. You know, mental health, the awareness has, you know, certainly in the last year or two increased. I guess it's two questions. How has that sort of come into football, if it has at all? And also, does your clinic, do you kind of also work on the mental aspect of it, or is it more the physical? Happy for whoever wants to.
I think I'll answer the first bit. Psychologists, their impact into elite football has grown in recent years, quite rightly. I think it's something that was probably ignored over the years or dealt with differently. Me and Gary would always call ourselves very amateur psychologists, because pre-psychologists in sport, you ended up being the sounding board for players. You spent a lot of time with them, a lot of journeys on trains, planes, buses, hotel rooms, and you spoke an awful lot. And sometimes they would share a lot of stuff with you. Gary, with some famous ones, obviously, over the years with the addictions that he had to deal with some players. But yeah, it's becoming more used, shall we say, becoming more normal, more acceptable. And I think people are learning now, with all the campaigns that are going on, that this whole "it's okay not to be okay" thing, I think is important, and it can only be a good thing. The clinic, no, less so. We don't have psychologists at the clinic, but we go back to our amateur days again and do our best with them. Anything to add there, Gary, or not?
No, not really. I think you've got to break it down into sports psychology, in where psychologists are being used to help the performance of a player. And then you've got the mental health issues that doesn't matter if they're a footballer or they're a bus driver or an ambulance driver, they're human beings. And I think the one key to it is the sports psychology part of it's being as accepted within sport. I think the biggest change in the last 1 or 2 years, and I do a lot of work with the PFA. I did the opening to their mental awareness or health booklet they give out. The biggest thing is encouraging players to talk about mental health. And this is a society change. I think Prince William's doing some amazing work using footballers to get that out into the open. And I think the biggest thing I would say is we've got to forget these are footballers and make them human beings first. Doesn't matter what they earn, what they do, they are still human beings first. And I think that's a massive part. And I think a lot of clubs are doing a lot of work on wellness, mindfulness, mental health. And I think it can only be for the better of the game.
Absolutely. I know we're not going to go into specific players. So I don't expect you to go into the kind of specific injuries, but obviously in your time, we had some big injuries with Eduardo, with Aaron Ramsey and things like that. Did that generally change the way clubs work? Did anything happen where you kind of just changed processes, the rehab of it, or was it all kind of nothing's really changed in 10 years and there's a process and you kind of stick to it? I mean, just a little bit of insight without going into too much detail, obviously.
I think
it changes staffing levels. I mean, that in the last, even I left Arsenal in 2008, and within 5 years the staffing levels doubled. So straight away, the care that the players can get to look after injuries and recover from injuries went through the roof. Second point before I pass over to Colin is the awareness of the support staff of the need of emergency action plans. I mean, ironically, the catalyst for this was when Petr Cech fractured his skull playing for Chelsea at Reading, I think it was.
Yeah.
And so the planning of the medical teams, the support of how you get a player off the field with a cardiac arrest, the Fabrice Muamba incident, that we've put in place a lot more processes, protocols, policies to protect the players and, ironically, to protect ourselves as medical staff, because if they weren't in place and something went wrong, we're ultimately responsible.
Yeah, I think about 15 years ago, I suppose it was, we all certainly upskilled around advanced emergency aid, as Gary said, around the Petr Cech thing, and the training that was set up was really good, and it put you under a lot of pressure for a couple of days, made you look stupid sometimes. A lot of people were made to look stupid, but the training was really good. And when you get an Eduardo, when you get an Aaron Ramsey, you could talk, I could name a few, you do resort back to your training, and you look back on it afterwards and you reflect on what you may have done better, what you thought you'd done well, and was everything in place. And most of the time it was really well done, but it all comes down to the pre-match communication, pre-match planning. You get to know the paramedics at the away grounds. You get to know where the hospital is. You get to know where the ambulance is parked. It's all so well planned. I'm talking obviously at Premier League level. As you go down, it's slightly different, but at Premier League level, it was so well done. You were so well drilled pre-match.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I'll get the elephant out of the room. Internationally, the same thing happens when you go away and you plan for emergencies like fractured dislocations of ankles at a World Cup in Brazil. And the irony of that was I did all the planning for it, and I was the one on the stretcher talking to all the doctors that I'd met 3 months before. So I'll get that out of the way now before someone else.
I think Nigel in the back was going to come in at the end to about that. A slightly more sort of fun question here, I guess, from Dean. He said he loves to know who was the kind of fittest player that you kind of work with. He said in the current squad, but obviously Colin, you sort of left 2 years ago and stuff, so the squad's changed a lot. But generally, were there a couple of naturally really fit players that were kind of, just naturally fit?
I suppose you'd measure fitness sometimes by the distance they were covering in games. Obviously, we could very easily measure very accurately the distance they were covering, and how much of that was high speed, how much of it was distance and jogging and walking. Aaron Ramsey was a very, very fit player.
Yeah.
Regularly cover very high distances in games. An odd one that not many people would probably naturally go to was Mathieu Flamini, who always covered enormous distance in games. They're the two that spring to mind with regards to fit around distance. Obviously, that doesn't encompass strong or quick or anything else, but fitness-wise, I think I've missed anyone obvious. Have I, Gary? Aaron Ramsey?
Gary, from when you were there, in your era?
No, I mean, look, 10 years ago, you'd only talk about midfield players being the fittest. I think the way the game's gone, the fullbacks now becoming the fittest because of the way the game's gone. And I think if you look at distance covered, the fullbacks are often the ones that are doing most of the high-intensity sprints, not only the distance covered. But, yeah, I mean, historically, you it would normally be midfield players, but I think you've covered the main ones up to date. Obviously, I go back a little bit further than Colin. I go back to the Brian Talbot era. So now he was fit, by the way.
You touched on kind of when Arsene Wenger came, he made changes and things, but generally throughout your time, under George Graham and then Arsene Wenger, I mean, generally, how is your kind of your jobs just developed and changed, I guess, over the years as different ideas, different coaches, different sort of methods have come into play?
You first.
Thanks, yeah. I'll put it into context. When I started in '86, I was full-time. George Graham was the manager full-time. Theo Foley was the assistant manager full-time. And the kit man was full-time. That was it. So I keep coming back to it. One of the biggest changes is staffing levels. Technology's made a big difference. Size of squads has made a big difference. Don't forget, again, when I started, you were allowed one substitute. It then went on to two substitutes. It then went on to two substitutes and a goalkeeper, not the 7 that you have now. So the changes, again, I refer back to this article we did. I think you'll find it really interesting to read it.
I think, obviously, I was managing a team when I left of about 12 people, massage therapists, physios, the doc, other people around that, sports science to a level. And it was, the communication was enormous. When Gary was at Arsenal as the only physio and he had an opinion on something, that was it. It was his opinion or no opinion. Then I came in and muddied the waters a little bit. But then when I was looking after 4 or 5 physios at the ends, all with very good opinions, very experienced people, it was harder because there had to be a level of communication and man management, which wouldn't have existed probably 20, 30 years ago. So that was a big difference for me.
There's been a question from Tom, and he goes, a bit of a fun one. How did players like Ray Parlour and Tony Adams maintain their fitness despite their, let's just leave it at lifestyles. Let's not say the word he said before that. But I mean, were they? I guess were those sort of players easy to kind of manage, so to speak, or when they were at least on the field, they were deadly serious, I guess.
That's a cultural thing. In those days, the culture of football was you played hard on a Saturday, you then socialised hard, you then played hard the following Saturday. Didn't have midweek games, very rarely played midweek. We had no European football early on. And when football changed, when the Premier League started, Arsenal come on board, they couldn't maintain that because they couldn't sustain it at that level. But in the early days, you got your fitness from matches. Pre-season, we would play up to 9 or 10 pre-season friendlies, and you got fit by playing matches. Whereas now it's much more scientific. And again, I've got to say it, players like that, although nicest guys, some of the best players in the world, they would not survive in today's game with that lifestyle.
No, I agree. Yeah.
No.
They're athletes now. They're athletes now, footballers as well. Whereas back then they were footballers and happened to be athletes as well.
It's changed. Quite a nice one from Zach here, and we've probably only got a few more minutes now. But Zach said, in both of your time at Arsenal, you've obviously sat on the bench for some iconic games, right close up to the action, often next to the manager. Can you pick a kind of single footballing highlight, sort of individually, a footballing highlight? Just remember.
Easy.
Go on.
89.
Yeah.
Never, ever be done again. And I've been so pleased in the last month that they've shown it, reruns of it on the telly, and actually give it the credit it deserved. Yeah. That was phenomenal, 89, and the emotion. Oh.
What are your sort of memories from the day?
I remember crying pitchside. We had lifted the trophy, the boys had gone in, I came back out pitchside to phone my wife, and I just burst into tears. Because and the party home was the motorway on the way back with the fans. It was fantastic.
Is there like nerves for you though as well on a game like that, knowing that it's such a delicate game? We need a goal. If Smudge goes down in the first half, God, that's an issue for us. What kind of, how do you deal with the nerves?
I'm claiming the assist because I went on and treated Kevin Richardson, and that 2 minutes it took me to get rid of the cramp. That was when we scored the winning goal. So I'm claiming the assist on that one. I'll let Colin answer his version.
Yeah.
Definitely get match day nerves. I used to go running on a match day. If you look at me now, I don't do so much of it. I used to go running on a match day to get rid of my match day nerves. And then once you get into match preparation, you get in the zone. You're like the players. Your preparation is the same. The way you lay out the strappings, the way you set the dressing room up. You'd watch the game, but you're not watching the game. You're watching for injuries. How are the players? Have anyone got any knocks? And I jokingly used to come home and say to my wife, I've got to watch Match of the Day tonight because I haven't watched the game today. And so, yeah, you did get nervous. But once you got into your work mode, that took over. I'll let Colin answer.
Yeah, I think you're right. During the game, you're on autopilot, and it is nerves, it is adrenaline, certainly, and I'll miss that. I'll always miss that. Yeah, but you did get an autopilot. I used to get match day nerves as well, depending on where we were. But as far as highlights are concerned, obviously the FA Cup finals are always going to be in my mind because there were quite a lot of them. But as a first-team physio, being 2-0 down against Hull was a very black day until those 3 goals went in. So that was a really big highlight. Winning at Spurs was always a massive thing. To be able to walk down that tunnel after the game, gently shaking hands with their medical team. I mean, to win at Spurs was always fantastic because the atmosphere was so crazy. But yeah, there's a lot of highlights. I can't match 89, of course not.
Yeah, of course.
White Hart Lane winning the league, Carl, wasn't far behind.
Well, yeah, great, wasn't it? Great.
Yeah, there was actually a question about. I mean, obviously you sit in the dugout and stuff like that, and how do you think kind of no fans will kind of affect players, affect the coaches, affects everyone really? Because it is a very, very unique proposition we're about to see next week.
Yeah, I don't know is the answer, but it has. But it has to. It has to affect the emotion, surely.
I mentioned it earlier on, and then watching the German games, I just think it lacked a little bit of passion. And that's the bit that I think might be lacking without the fans. I mean, do you know that one of the most pleasing things for me when this does go ahead, I'm hoping football realises how important the fans are. Because without them, it's not the same game.
Absolutely. Right. Have we lost Gary? Has he just turned his camera off? Perhaps. I think we've just lost him, but that was okay. That was the last thing. I was actually going to give him a nice compliment, which you can pass on.
He might be back, but go on there. Listen.
It's okay. We got a comment from Luke who said, it's not a question, but the only time I got into the North Bank of Highbury singing was in 2005. I was 12 years old. We beat Everton 2-0. Sol Campbell scored twice. And Gary walked in front of us. I shouted, "Hello, Gary." He waved and the North Bank erupted into "There's only one Gary Lewin." I hope you remember that. So that's quite a nice...
If it doesn't come back, I'll make sure you use that story. But
yeah, absolutely. Nice way to end. So, Colin and Gary, thank you for joining us. Hope you guys enjoyed it as well. We had lots of questions, lots of interaction, so that's obviously really good.
Listen, more than happy to answer some more of these questions. Obviously, you can get us on Twitter. And
Yeah, if there are any questions, members can kind of email them over to us and maybe we can just kind of send you them in a bulk and stuff like that. And if people want to find out about your clinic, I guess, just if they're interested, where can they kind of go?
Well, the website is www.lewinclinic.co.uk. The Twitter feed and the Instagram feed are @TheLewinClinic. I'll send you the article that we did comparing 17 to 87 and you can ping that out.
I'll ping that out with your social media handles as well. So thank you, Colin. Guys, thank you for joining us. We will be back next week. So we have got one more virtual event and I think we're going to hold it on Monday. And I think I can announce it. Hopefully he won't let me down, but we'll all have Alan Smith-Smudge joining us. And then we'll probably take a bit of a break while the football's on because there'll be games most nights. And then we'll maybe resume back in the summer or whenever the summer will be. But thank you for joining tonight. Stay safe, look after yourselves, and hopefully
thank you, Colin.
Monday.
No problem.
Thank you, Colin.
Gary's laptop battery went, by the way, so there's a
no worries. He went at the right time. Cheers, guys. Thank you very much.
All right.
Fellas, all the best.